This session is sponsored by Comcast Business. Beyond fast is technology that makes business boom.
Hey everyone, George Christie here with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to our Vineyard and Grower Virtual Conference, Growing Forward. Our first session today, we're going to be taking a look at the California Crush Report and what the implications might be from the data that we've collected for the grape and bulk wine market going forward. Now, this session is going to be moderated by Glenn Proctor of Ciatti Company. Glenn's got a panel of his colleagues to basically help analyze that report and make some sense out of what that might mean going forward. Now, before we jump into the session, just a couple of things. Number one, as is always the case, we want these sessions to be as interactive as possible. So please take advantage of the chat feature. All of our speakers are in the chat room. They're going to be taking your questions on as they come in real time. So please, please, please take advantage of that. You've got access to these experts, and we just want you to take advantage of it. And then last, but certainly not least, I just want to thank our sponsors. We could not do it without them. First, Comcast Business, Turrentine Wine Brokerage, Enardis. We've also got Orchard Right and SciTech. Without their support, we would not be able to offer these for free. So thank you for your support. You guys are great to work with. And I think that basically is it. So let me turn it over to Glenn and we'll get into it. Glenn, go ahead and take it from here.
George, thank you so much. It's great. Appreciate the introduction. And we're all very excited at Ciatti to be able to work with Wynn today on talking about the implications from the 2021 Crush Report and give some idea of what we see going on in the marketplace. So let me go ahead and start my slide presentation and we'll begin. So yeah, today we want to talk a little bit about the implications from the Crush Report and how that's going to affect us as we go into the future in 2021. And give you a market update about what we see going on in the industry today. All of us here are with the Ciatti Company. We've been in business almost 50 years. We've got 10 offices throughout the world, and we work as a broker between buyers and sellers in putting deals together, grapes and bulk wine and other products. So by doing that, we get a very good idea of the activity, the pricing, the dynamics of the market. So we'll try to share that with you today, what we see going on by looking at the market. And how we're going to do that in terms of a presentation is I'll give a little introduction, but really the meat and potatoes of what's going on is we're going to divide it up by region. So for the interior Central Valley, and talk about implications and overview there. We're going to have Johnny Leonardo, who's located in Lodi for us, and he's going to talk about the grape market in the Central Valley. And then Greg Livengood is going to talk about the bulk wine implications and have his comments centered around the interior region. And then the next set, we're going to go and look at the coastal market, and Todd Azevedo is going to jump in and talk about the grape market and what's going on in the coastal areas. And then Chris Welch will come back in and talk about bulk wine and the dynamics he sees taking place as this current market that we sit in. And then we'll try to wrap it up with just a few additional comments from the team on what they think going on. So, you get a chance to talk to a lot of us at Ciatti and get some different opinions. So hopefully this is helpful in terms of understanding what is going on in the market today. I wanted to just give a quick overview in terms of the market itself. I mean, case good growth has held its own during the pandemic. We can, what the wine sales have done okay, but it's, off premise where we've seen the biggest bump has done much better than on premise where we've seen challenges because of the pandemic. So with that, we've seen certain wineries benefiting more than other wineries. I think that'll be brought up today. But as we begin 2021, we have much lower inventories on the bulk market. And really the effect here is the small crop in 2020, which was 3.4 million tons. So that was the biggest change that really created the market we're seeing today. And I think some of our team will talk a little bit about where we were and where we are, but that small crop really was the dynamic change that moved, I think, the market where it is today. Limited bulk inventories available. That'll be talked about. And we've seen a rebound in terms of grape activity and bulk wine activity, and some pricing with that. So that's kind of the news. I think underlying all this, so is that, we're in a pandemic and there's these challenges and unknowns and uncertainties. And that's going to be something we will, that causes a pause a little bit, I guess, when we're trying to understand where the market's going in the future, just because there is unknowns. But I do think as we go through, hopefully you'll get a flavor for that, where we see those taking place at. Just quickly to look at the 2020 crush, and I think the rest of our team will share some take on numbers, but I just want to give a quick overview. So this is 2011, 2020 total tons of wine grapes crushed. And, this was the driving factor of where we sit today in the market. So 2020, we crushed 3.4 million tons, significantly down from the 3.9 million tons we crushed in 2019. And remember, 2019, we probably left 150 to 200,000 tons in the field above that 3.9 because of the 18 crop was so big. So this 2020 light crop, as light as it was since 2011, is really the factor, I think, that's driving the changes that we've seen. And components of that lower yield are, just lighter yield in general, but also some issues that we saw with 2020 with smoke. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that too, and some of those effects of the market. Just in terms, quick few slides on the crush report itself and what that showed us. So this is tons across 4 different regions of California, and you can see tons on the left, color chart there. But you can basically see 2020 in that light blue was down in all areas. It was down the most significantly in the North Coast. So that probably had something to do with that lighter crop and also some smoke effects. Really in the northern interior, Central and San Joaquin Valley, we didn't see what was crushed really affected by smoke concerns. So every area was down in terms of total tons. As we talked about, total tons overall is down. And if we look at tons by variety, you can see everything on the major varietals, and I think everything but basically Sauvignon Blanc of the major varietals, which was up, everything was down and down relatively significantly. So Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot here, tons down. So we knew it was going to, that crop was light, and I think we saw some of that as we started harvest and because of the smoke concerns. I think the one thing that was a little more surprising when we look at that crush report is when you look at statewide average prices. So you can see here price per ton on the left and light blue versus yellow. So Chardonnay was down a little bit, but where we really saw some dynamic changes in price was Cabernet and Pinot, down significantly from the year before. Some of the dynamics here is potentially that we had an oversupplied situation. So a lot of grapes were coming out of contract, and those prices were renegotiated down. So that's part of it. I think also part of it is potentially some smoke effects and how those contracts were renegotiated. So that gives you a little take, and just in terms of the overview of potentially where we are in the market at 30,000 feet and what that crop report initially showed. So what I'd like to do is hand off to the rest of our team to really break down the regions and give you much more specific information by what's going on. So like I said, it's great to have the whole team here to talk about what we see happening in the marketplace. So we're first going to look at the Central Valley and try to break that down. First speaking is going to be Johnny Leonardo. He's going to talk about grapes and what's going on there. And then he'll turn that over to Greg Livingood, who will be more specific about what's going on in the wine market in the Central Valley. So guys, it's yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenn. As Glenn mentioned, my name is Johnny Leonardo. I'm the broker that really concentrates in the interior regions of California. And I'm going to discuss the interior grape regions, both the 2020 market and the 2020 crush and its impacts, and real briefly talk about the current market as well. In 2020, the interior grape crush, I think, appeared to reflect the rest of California. And each individual district was down overall, and every main variety collectively was down as well, except for, with the exception of Sauvignon Blanc, like Glenn mentioned. But each district had its mixed results within certain varieties in each district. And I think that differed versus the coast, which saw larger decreases across the board. And while the coast saw larger decreases by percentage, still the larger decrease by volume was in the interior. And that's really just a sheer result of the amount of grapes crushed overall in the interior. I think another aspect that differed with the interior versus the coast really was in 2020, the grape market was very active early on. And I think we're talking pre-pandemic, right? And this was in large part due to after 2019, which was a very slow year, very, very little grape purchasing going on. Grapes come out of contract. So buyers come in, they typically renegotiate those contracts and reevaluate their sourcing strategies. If you fast forward to the spring and summer of 2020, you put a post-pandemic environment into the mix, and we start getting sales numbers that were relatively positive for off-premise. And you have these wineries that were doing well on the off-premise. Those wineries became more aggressive in the grape buying, which really resulted in nothing left uncontracted in the interior. Now, if you combine the entire northern and southern interior together, the overall production was down 9%. And this was little more than 2.6 million tons produced in the interior. And it's significant to note that that is 77% of what the total crush was. But that was 270,000 tons less than what was produced in 2019. And to put that in perspective with wine, 270,000 tons is roughly 45 million gallons less than in 2019. But as I mentioned earlier, it was kind of mixed per variety, per district. The larger interior, or the largest interior region in terms of total tons produced, is District 13, which is Madera, Fresno area. They decreased overall by about 6%, but still produced 1.2 million tons, or almost 1.2 million tons. But for instance, Chardonnay was down 9% and Cabernet was actually up 10%. You go up north to District 12, which is more of the Modesto area, and it was the opposite. Chardonnay was up 10%, whereas Cabernet decreased a more significant 16%. In Lodi, which is the second largest region within the interior, they were down over 12% with a loss of almost 100,000 tons compared to 2019. Chardonnay in particular was hit hard, down 23%. Same goes for Clarksburg, where Chardonnay, being their largest variety, was actually down 16%. But both of those areas, and as Glenn alluded to earlier, were actually up in Sauvignon Blanc production. Now, this in large part was due to Sauvignon Blanc having maybe a higher demand over the last few years. So there were some plantings being done in the last couple of years, some graftings. So those new vines produced had an impact on the increase in tonnage. Now, I think it's important to note that there's also vineyard removals still occurring. They occurred throughout 2020, and they're still occurring now. For instance, Lodi's Inn, particularly Old Vines Inn, that was low yielding, didn't have as high as demand in the past few years as other varieties. It didn't make economic sense in some cases to stay in the ground. So some of those vineyards were removed. Some other varieties, such as older Cabernet, that may have had lower yields, some of those were removed as well. So these all had impact on what the total crush numbers were. But right now, the current grape market has already been active. And it's important to note that this isn't necessarily completely a reactionary to the crush, to the lighter crop. But this was something that was kind of in motion, like I mentioned, after 2019. So it was a regular cycle where wineries were coming in, buying grapes. A lot of those grapes that were purchased last year were on 1-year contracts. So they, again, were becoming available this year. But there's definitely increasing demand. It's created a tightening of supply. Prices of grapes have strengthened with multi-year contracts being offered, as well as planting contracts being offered, which is something we haven't seen in about 3 or 4 years. It's definitely a different look than what it was 2 years ago, but it has as much to do with a shorter bulk wine supply as well, which I believe Greg next is going to talk about.
Hey, Johnny, thank you very much for that. That was really interesting. Thank you very much for that report. As mentioned, my name's Greg Livingood. Today, I'm going to be talking about what's happening in the bulk wine market in the interior and the Central Valley. And in order to do that, I think what I'd like to do is start by going backward and looking at where we were in the market before this crop took place in 2020. And in order to start that history, I'd like to start in 2018. There were a lot of headwinds facing the interior at that time. We had a very difficult situation with the export market. A lot of our exports go from the U.S. come out of the southern San Joaquin Valley. A lot of the product comes out of that area, and a lot of that goes to the UK. And going back to 2018, when this whole Brexit thing started over there, we lost a lot of demand in the UK, and that hit the southern part of the valley rather hard. In addition to that, we've been going through years of premiumization. Everyone had been talking about premiumization for about 5 years. And of course, as people were trading up out of the value end of the segment, putting a lot of downward pressure on pricing and demand on 1.5 liters and some of the 5-liter products, that also put some negative impacts on the demand side for valley grapes and valley wine. And then as we moved into the summer of 2018, then we started getting these rumors of big crop coming across the state. So going into the end of 2018, things were starting to look pretty dark for the interior. We do get this big crop in 2018, which obviously was much bigger on the coast than it was in the valley from a percentage basis, but that really put the valley in a tough spot. There was a tremendous amount of inventory of bulk wine in the coastal regions, and that really compressed pricing down on top of the valley. It was very difficult for valley producers to sell their wines against coastal products that were essentially being priced at the same price level. So we were seeing things like Cabernet Sauvignon going for low to mid single digits in the Central Coast, which is traditionally where we were in the valley. And so at that time, prices started to drop down into this low single digits in the valley. We were seeing deals on Merlot, in some cases Cabernet hit that $3 mark. So by the time we got to the end of 2019, with all this headwind coming, the valley was still in a very tough place. And as we move into early 2020, the market doesn't seem to be getting much better. And then we hit March, and the COVID effect takes place. And that was really the first actual sign of a little bit of a spark for the bulk market in the interior. And that came from the demand side, where we had seen all this downward pressure on these 1.5 liters and these 5 liters. We start to see a new consumer behavior take place, where the 3-liter products, which had already done fairly well, really start to take off. And we start to see a little bit of a return to the value segment from, in a reversal of this premiumization trend. So when we move from March into the spring, we just start to see a little bit more demand happening in the valley, which it was positive, but at the same time, there was still all this inventory out there in the marketplace. And so with all that inventory out there, especially on the coast, we weren't necessarily seeing the big bump in price that we would like to see with this extra demand that we were getting from this COVID effect. So we're still seeing wines moving, but again, we just kept hearing and being part of seeing these $3 deals and $4 deals, which again are traditionally not where you want to be in the valley, but that's where all the activity was. And that brought us into the spring, when we started to hear a little bit of the rumors out there that maybe this crop wasn't going to be quite as big as we initially thought, and it wasn't going to be another bumper crop. And so you started to see a little bit more demand, but you still had this blanket of inventory sitting on the coast, sitting on top of us, that wasn't really allowing us to break through on the price. And then the big event And it what obviously changed everything for the state, but really helped the valley as well from a bulk perspective, is we, the 13th and 14th of August, we have these big lightning storms and we have fire. And obviously the fires had a huge negative impact on the state. But what they also did is they spurred some of these buyers, these bulk buyers, into making some decisions that actually help strengthen and balance the bulk side of the marketplace. And so we started to see a lot of coastal wines being pulled out of the system as some very large players in the bulk market jumped in, decided to take a position on the 19 and 18 wines, predominantly from the coast. And they went from high single-digit pricing to now we move into double-digit pricing, which takes all of that pressure off of the valley. And so from a pricing perspective, so as all that inventory moves out of the system, by the time we start to see the fall of 2020, there's a tremendous amount of activity brewing in the Central Valley. And so now all of a sudden, instead of seeing $3 and $4 deals, we're seeing $6 deals, $7 deals, $8 deals on a lot of those same varietals, as all that pressure from this, I call it a decompression of pricing as the coastal areas moved up. It allowed for these buyers to come in and move back to the valley for their value product. And so these big successful brands that were based on value wines are now buying back in the valley. And again, you're seeing a healthy market, and you're seeing pricing back to levels where growers and wineries can make money in that mid to high single digit area. So that brings us into today's market. And if you look today, you see a lot of activity in the valley across the board. You see Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc, all of those varieties with a lot of activity. Again, you're at the mid to high single digits on pricing in both the southern and the northern interior. You're seeing a lot of activity on Cabernet and even Merlot. You're seeing activity on Cabernet. We're seeing a lot of offers for multi-year deals. And again, this is all north of $6, which is a big change from where we were over the past couple of years. As far as where we see things today, I would say from a bulk perspective, the valley is probably as close to being in balance as it has been since 2017. And we have a very healthy market today. We do have some concerns out there. Johnny mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of vines pulled out of the ground. When you look back at the report, and especially at the southern end of the valley, I think we do have some concern that maybe too much Pinot is gone, maybe Pinot Grigio. There's a lot of that disappeared over the last couple of years, and so you do see there are varieties like that where you see some spikes in pricing, and you're hoping with the way things are going today that there will be enough volume out there to feed these value brands as they continue to accelerate and move forward. So that's what I have for now. Thank you very much. And I think I'm kicking it off to Todd Azevedo, who is going to be doing the grape market on the coast.
Yeah, thank you, Greg and Johnny and Glenn for the introduction and the information on the interior of the California. Going on to moving along the coastline, Chris and I will be discussing what the trends are that's been happening over the last couple of years to understand where we have been and where we're going to, and not to focus too much down on the numbers from the crush report. It's the activity that was early on going through 19 was very subdued along the coastline. Most of it was concentrated in the North Coast. A lot of it along the Sauvignon Blanc up in the North Coast area. Obviously, always the jewel of everybody's eye is always that Napa Cab market as they move through that. Sonoma County had some challenges in 2019 with some of the grapes, with some bigger brands leaving the area. And then as you move down through the coastline and getting into the Central Coast, you saw a lot of that being very challenged from a lot of people. Not a lot of smaller brands down in that neck of the woods. And most of the buyers were actually coming over from the valley due to some of those larger crops in 2018, excuse me, and getting into 2019. Now, as you go through 2019 and we see a lot of bulk wine still in the market, it really pushes and puts a lot of pressure on the grape buying, because a lot of your supply can come from that neck of the woods, or come from the bulk wine industry as it comes. What we saw as we moved through 19 and got into 20 was a lot of lack of activity. Even as you saw the prices, and Johnny mentioned before how you had a lot of contracts sunset, and a lot of people came back into the market to buy more grapes at that time. And it really, growers especially, were acting a little desperate in some areas along the coastline, especially down in the Central Coast as you get through like Livermore and Paso Robles areas, to make something happen. Now we go into the middle of 2020, we get into July and August, and all of a sudden, as Greg mentioned, we had some of these fires that had happened. Some of the perceived smoke damage, I guess, is what ended up along the Grape and the coastlines. And a lot of that bulk wine inventory got sucked up. There was an issue, obviously, with buying grapes going into 2020 because of the perceived smoke damage and what they were going to get. And it was even harder to get stuff tested to find out where the markers were for smoke along those coastlines. As we moved through August, we saw some of the prices get renegotiated down, rather it be because of perceived smoke damage, rather it be because markets were changing. And on top of that, we're adding in this whole pandemic and markets not being opened up. So a lot of producers of wine out there at this point in time were very nervous and just cautious of how they proceeded forward. As we move into the end of 2020 and getting into the fourth quarter, a lot of bulk wine has been sucked out of the system. A lot of the lack of activity in Mother Nature, it in and of itself kicked out a smaller crop, as you can see on the crush report. We move into this new trend of what's going on here in 2021, in the first quarter of this year. Of all my years with the Ciatti Company and doing the grapes and bulk wine on this side, I've never seen a more active market, and I've never seen a more interested buyers from all corners of California, interested in finding out information about where the pricing, where we're going, and a lot of it being more than just 1 year spot year deals. We're seeing multi-year deals being pulled along. A lot of producers have started to look at their 3 year and 5 year possibilities of them supplying themselves. And so the challenge that we're seeing right now is that you've had a lot of activity from outside of the area coming from over from the valley. Now you got the local buyers from the coastlines, whether you're in Sonoma County and or Napa or down in Paso Robles, especially down in the Central Coast, where they've seen a lot of activity from the locals, and more so on 3 and 5 year deals. Some of the biggest trends we've seen happening so far is in the Paso Robles Cabernet market, some of that Santa Barbara and Monterey Pinot Noir market. We've seen a lot of activity around some of the North Coast Sauvignon Blanc, always the Napa Cabernet world, and Napa fruit in general. And then, the one thing that's been struggled the last couple of years, as I mentioned earlier, was the Sonoma County market. And we've seen a renewed interest, especially when you talk about the AVAs, the sub-AVAs divided up in between. Rather, you're talking about your Russian River Pinot Noirs, your Alexander Valley Cabernets, or getting over into your Sonoma Coast areas of a lot of activity around those grapes at this point in time. It's a very positive thing. I hope this carries on. We obviously have to wait to see how this crop turns out for this year. Obviously Mother Nature shouldn't kick out 2 short crops in a row, but you never know, and we'll see how this interest goes. But it'd be easier to understand this whole thing if when Chris Welsh over here talks about the bulk wine market. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Todd. I appreciate that. My name's Chris Welch, and I wanted to present to you guys today some information regarding the coastal bulk market, which is where I spend a lot of my time brokering a lot of bulk wine deals. And first and foremost, I just wanted to talk about where we are in bulk inventory levels today. And you can look at this slide here and see that we had this real buildup of inventory from 2019 into early 2020, and then really look at this real dramatic decrease all the way from when the pandemic began. And we saw a lot of bulk activity when previously a lot of wineries had looked at bulk wine as a liability. Increasingly more and more, it's looking more like an asset to a lot of wineries today. And what we saw in 2020, even as harvest was coming, that there were some wineries that were well oversupplied with bulk wines, that they were nervous enough about their inventory positions that they were looking to move significant amount of bulk wines even prior to vintage 2020 during harvest. So really over summertime, there was a sort of a shift as the on-premise market had really taken a hit. Some brands that were had their wagons hitched to the on-premise consumption, moving wine in bulk to wineries that were well positioned to sell wine off-premise in grocery store chains, et cetera. So real dynamic shift happening and regarding those two inflection points. One was regarding pandemic pantry stuffing, as they call it, at the grocery store level. And then two, regarding smoke exposure at harvest. That was when the frenetic pace of the bulk market really kicked into high gear. And what Greg talked about previously regarding that coastal price compression, we can take a look at some of that in some of these other slides here. That if you look at, say, Lake and Mendocino County Cabernet, a lot of this pricing for, if you look at the Cabernet pricing here, a lot of that was sub $10 a gallon, a lot of $7 and $8 a gallon deals where buyers were coming to us and saying, hey, I need Cabernet from anywhere in California. I just, it needs to be less than $8 a gallon. There was a lot of volume that shifted from Mendocino, Lake County, Paso Robles, and specifically Chardonnay out of Monterey that was trading at basically on parity with California appellation wines. And that's that downward pressure and that price compression that was Greg was talking about, because that for every gallon that we sold out of the coast, that was a gallon that was not being sold out of Lodi. So that's where we ended up going into harvest. So to talk about where we are today, this is really about a situation that was brought on by an instability of supply. It's not that we've had this huge run and increase of sales, but it's a really challenging market to understand because the future uncertainties regarding how the market's going to react to vaccines and restaurants opening is going to be a challenge to understand. But where we are today, I think one of the most important things to look at when we talk about 2020 bulk wines or the 2021 market today is to understand that there's some issues around smoke. And that exposure, actually, a lot of the wines that I've been tasting, a lot of those wines I think have turned out to be better than a lot of people were perhaps nervous about at harvest. So a lot of things, if they got picked, I think the wines are pretty good. One thing where I think people have concerns around smoke is specifically on coastal Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir in general is a coastal phenomenon, and that is predominantly where people are sourcing Pinot Noir from. And also Pinot Noir is susceptible to other flavor compounds being imparted into it. Even people know when you blend something into Pinot Noir, a little bit goes a long way. So that's a challenge going forward for the Pinot Noir market and just really trying to understand that. Another point I would make about the bulk market right now is when I was talking about how wineries were looking at previously as bulk wine as a liability, today they're looking at it more of as an asset. And what this has put pressure on is for those wineries to source bulk wine today, but also I think what's an important piece of it is the private label market and the hang on, I'm going to stop there. What am I saying? The private label and control brands, right? One of the things that people are looking at that's going to be challenging to source is negociants and private label brands, companies that were buying well-appellated wines, higher-end wines at a perceived value when the market was a little more sluggish and oversupplied. Those negociants, those private label suppliers are in some cases having to source bulk wines that are 2x the price that they were paying previously. And the opportunity to go to another appellation or go to broader California appellation is proving challenging because of the points that Johnny and Greg made regarding that market having its own challenges to source as well. So that's kind of the situation in the coastal region right now. We're back to more stratified pricing, what I would consider more traditional pricing, as opposed to that more compressed pricing we saw previously. And it's a more dynamic market to understand. I think what's interesting, though, is I think we know about where the valley is right now on pricing and understand that demand level, given COVID and the new realities of the off-premise marketplace. I think Napa and Sonoma, I think we know that those things are, I won't say insulated, but they generally tend to stay a little more stable. What will be interesting going forward is where does Lake and Mendocino County sit? Where does Monterey and Paso Robles sit, and Santa Barbara? And are those bulk wines going to continue to be more premium appellations and command that premium price in that stratified pricing model? Or are those going to be, if we get a larger crop in 2021, will those be back to where we were previously, where they're considered more premium California wines at the California appellation level? So those are the things I'm looking for to understand this marketplace about where is this headed and how does the coast react to the current and future situation. Is will it continue to be that higher end, higher price point bulk wine activity, or will it be more compressed down into the California appellation tier? So that's what we'll be looking for. So thanks a lot. And then from there, I'll kick it back to Glenn.
But, I think you're right. I think that the driving factor here was that light crop, right? And we had the pandemic effects of sales, and, that's definitely affected the valley. But you look at the coast, you wonder if we did not have that shorter crop or the smoke effects, what would the coastal market look like, Chris? You kind of talked about that, for a while, everything was selling around the same price, and that changed that dynamic. So it's, I think the really thing that set us off and changed it was that adjustment of supply, which I think makes it harder to predict where that market, especially on the coast, how that settles out. How does it have legs? Or
I would also say that, in previous scenarios, we've had something known on either the supply side or the demand side that is affecting the market. We've had oversupplied markets, and we understand what's going on and how to react to those. We've had diminished demand or accelerated demand. Right now, we have two dynamics happening at the same time regarding uncertainty, regarding both on the supply side relative to how many tons did we actually crush this year. That was effect on the coastal regions that could have been affected by smoke. On the other side, we have, looking at the demand side, what does the future look like for on-premise consumption, and where does this market head? So that's what's challenging for us, I think, to understand. But those are the questions that we probably need to continue to ask and things to look at.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think that's what makes this, the uncertainties are unknown, kind of that cautiousness about the markets because of the unknowns. It's a challenge. We're going to go around and ask everybody a few questions. So just before we kind of finish here and try to get some takes, Chris, thanks for your thoughts on what's going on. Let's go to Johnny. Do you have any words of wisdom or nuggets of information as we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I don't know about words of wisdom, but I guess this climate in this market is just a reminder how quickly things can turn, and how there can be, it's not always necessarily about, a decrease in the crush or an increase, but it's also outside factors. Who would have predicted what happened in the last 12 months, right? And it just goes to show you how quickly things can do a 180 and turn around. And I guess it's important to keep relationships and keep them, value them in the good times and the bad times. It's obvious, I know, but it's very important right now.
Excellent point. I think that we're in a small business, right? So it's about having relationships, so the good and bad kind of usually gets you through. So excellent point. Greg, did you have any words of wisdom from your corner?
Sure. I mean, as we've been saying here, I think this is a supply side issue that we're facing right now. And when I say issue, it probably is a positive issue. The supply disruption that we saw this year did bring us back into balance. We all realize that we have not seen a big spike in demand. But that being said, we do have a supply issue that probably will only get worse between now and the next crop. You go back and look at some of those slides that Chris was showing there, you could see where our current inventory is as we sit here in February. We got a long way to go before we have that 2021 crop come in. And like Johnny said, it may turn everything around when it gets here, but we have a lot less inventory to work with between now and then. So I'm sure everybody's looking at that and making decisions and doing what they have to do to make sure that they can bridge the gap. And when you're talking about red wines, you're looking out into first quarter of 2022 before you have meaningful new supply to work with. White wines can turn more quickly, but again, we've got a long road ahead before we see any substantial relief in supply.
Yeah, no, I think it's like, as you said, until we get more supply, that bulk market probably going to continue to be tight, especially in the Valley. One other question, Greg, thanks for, is how does this relate to what we're looking in the global marketplace, where we sit in California? I mean, just a few seconds, but do you have just kind of a quick kind of update? Because I mean, one of the thoughts is if that market's tight, especially for Central Valley wines, is that people may look to go overseas. Is there a risk of kind of some erosion there? And kind of just quickly, where does like countries like Chile and some others sit today?
Sure. Well, we're not the only country that deals with Mother Nature, right? Yeah. So you mentioned Chile. They had some significant weather events this year that are causing them some problems as we speak, as they are in the middle of their 2021 harvest here. I think from an export perspective, as I mentioned when I was giving my remarks about the interior, with Brexit and the UK being such a big market for us, that has declined over time. We are seeing a little bit of an uptick in demand over there. Things have changed here in the market from the duty drawback perspective, and we've seen that re-implemented, and that actually helps to promote exports. But on the global side of things, California doesn't really ever compete on price with the rest of the world when we're going to Europe or anywhere else. That's just not where we sit. We're always going to be at a higher price than the rest of these places, and we have to sell on quality, and we have to sell on the California brand, which we do very well. But from a global perspective, I don't see that we're going to have a dramatic increase in imports, because it's not easy to just switch gears and do that. There are a lot of brands that are a mix of California and import brands or import wines already, and they'll continue to do that. I don't see anybody making any. I should say I don't think there's going to be a significant change in the way the industry sits for the next year from an import perspective. You will see a spike in imports for sure, but that ebbs and flows with our market all the time.
Yeah, but great. Well, thanks for those comments, Greg. Those were excellent. Todd, what kind of thoughts do you want to leave us with today when you kind of look at the coastal grape market or the market overall?
Yeah, I'd like to highlight one thing that Chris said and make sure that, as we sit here and we're very positive about what's going on and we're feeling very good about what, especially in the California interior and coastal market, is that, it's a push-pull type of deal when we're talking about the market, because of the increased pricing and the demand that's happening, is being pulled more from a lack of supply than it is by a push of more sales into this market. And, as an industry, we need to continue to focus on actually trying to grow this market, grow this California thing, instead of relying on Mother Nature or something else to create the demand that we want. So I think that's something we need to definitely focus on as an industry as a whole. I don't care if you're in the North Coast, the Central Coast, or in the interior. That's something California needs to focus on.
Excellent. Thanks, Todd. Chris, did you have any words of wisdom nuggets you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I would probably just throw in one last point just about the pool of buyers that we have for coastal bulk wine right now. I wouldn't consider it an exceptionally deep pool of buyers. It's some bigger buyers. I think what we hear from a lot of folks is regarding the new COVID reality in terms of off-premise sales is that if your brand was doing okay prior to COVID, your brand's still probably doing okay. Some other brands that were doing well in the off-premise arena are doing really well today. So we think it's a lot of the bulk wine activity that's happening right now is it's healthy, and there are some larger bulk wine transactions happening, but we would like to see a larger breadth of buyers. And I think we would consider this a more mature and vibrant market if we saw that in coastal appellations. That's just one point I'd like to throw in there at the end.
Hey, great points, everybody. Excellent. Everybody had a good take on, I think, what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and finish it with a few additional slides, and then we'll end the presentation. Yeah, and great comments from everybody. I think there on our team of everybody's got a little different perspective, but it's I think we're in unison in terms of what we see happening in the marketplace. So hopefully that's been interesting. Just to kind of summarize the supply and demand situation. I mean, overall, the market's moving to balanced. It seems like it's continuing to tighten in the valley, as Greg pointed out. It's going to probably continue to tighten, at least on the bulk market, until we get another crush. How big or small that's going to be, nobody knows. Coastal regions, definitely on the bulk market side, that's been brisk, and we're seeing grape activity even too, as Todd talked about. But I think the point Chris made about how deep is that bench on the coastal market in terms of buyers? I think there's still some chance that coastal market could weaken. And some of that's really around the fact that demand and the on-premise and what's going on as we go through COVID. But at least as we look at today, we've really moved to a balanced position. I think the question that runs through all our comments, it's a little bit of a tenuous balance. If this adjustment, if it had been based on demand growth, we're growing 6 or 8%, I think we'd be a little more bullish about what this means in the future. But given the uncertainties, and given this really was predicated on the fact that, we had a significantly less crush or supply adjustment in 2020, we're still trying to understand how far that can go. And if there's some weak points in there that still may show themselves. And it kind of leaves us with questions. The pandemic effects on wine sales, hard to answer those. I don't think anybody knows that, but they're going to affect people differently. I think so far 2020 wines, you really have not seen big issues with smoke, but I think it's going to be interesting how on the bulk side, people are going to jump into that market and where prices may go or not go because of that. And I think, as Johnny said, and basically every panelist, is crop size. We probably don't need another small crop, but I don't know if we need another big crop. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But again, a lot of things that are still tough to answer in this environment. I did want to let you know, so everybody on this team presenting today, here at Ciatti, we appreciate your time. We all broker wine and grapes. So this is a good way to introduce ourselves to you if you don't know us, but here's our contact information. Give us a call, send us an email if there's any way we can help. If you're selling or buying grapes or bulk wine out there, or just follow-up information on here's what's going on in the marketplace. A lot of what we do as a broker is really give information and talk about the dynamics of the market to help people make better decisions, or at least informed decisions. And the information is changing so fast with everything going on. Let us know if we can be of help. We're available. So please reach out to us. And just wanted to say thank you for your time. Thank you to George and his team at Win for putting this together. We appreciate the cooperation, appreciate you working with us. We do a California market report. It comes out monthly. It's free. Then you can subscribe to by going to our website or sending us an email. So that's if you're looking for information. We also do a global market report, same frequency. So other information you can get from us about, helping you make informed decisions as we go through this interesting time. So we wish everybody out there the best of health to you and your family. Thank you again so much for your time today.